All right, today I'm just going to do a short lecture on advances in genetics. So first, a question. Do you know the difference between a zorse, a zoni, and a zadonk? So just by looking at those words, you're like, oh, zebra and a horse, zoni and a pony, zebra and a donkey. Ligands, wolfins, and zebroids, oh my. So we do have ligers, okay? Wolfins, whales, and a dolphin, and then zebroids were the organisms on the previous slide. So my question to you is, if zebras and horses do not usually mate in nature, should people intentionally cross them? Why or why not? So in class, we're going to have this discussion, but if you're watching this, think about it. What do you think? All right, so looking at modern genetics and how we use DNA technology. So we've been discussing mutations, okay, and how mutations can change a protein and bring on genetic disorders or cancer. Well, changes in DNA can also change an organism. Okay, but we're not going to be talking about mutations. We're just going to be talking about traits in general. So they can occur naturally over time, or humans, through careful breeding, can direct how an organism can change over time. So we call this selective breeding, the process by selecting and breeding parent organisms to pass on particular traits of an organism. We do this with a lot of animals. People do this with pigeons. Okay, so let me bring over a picture of pigeons with artificial selection. Wow, I can't spell. All right, here it comes. Okay, so let's find a good real life picture of pigeons, because I don't think you would believe me. Okay, these are doves. Not what I'm looking for. This is a cartoon diagram. That's still not. But all these variations come from this pigeon in the middle. What the heck? I swear, I usually get a lot more colorful photos. Oh, here we go. Bam. All right. Let's see if this takes me to the actual image. Here it is. Okay, so just by looking at these pigeons, I mean, some of them look kind of crazy. The feathers covering the feet, as you can see here, the big chest on the front, the hood or the plume that's covering the head. We did this with corn. I don't know if you know what corn used to look like. This is what corn used to look like. Okay, it wasn't always the corn on the cob that we see today. It used to look like this, and through careful selective breeding, now corn looks like the corn that we see today. All right, let's take a look at this graph of world rice populations. A little outdated, as you can see, but what is the approximate difference between rice production in 1960, so we'll just say roughly here, and 2005, right here. So this is like 625, and this is, we'll just say 200. So you do the math, 425 metric ton difference. I think that's the unit. What factors do you think might account for the difference in rice production? Okay, increased yields, better methods, but the big one is actually probably got to do a lot with genetics. So we call this genetic engineering, the process in which a sequence of DNA from an organism is first isolated, and then it's inserted into another organism, and thus you change the organism's DNA. I don't know if you know this, but we actually use E. coli bacteria, the DNA from E. coli, and use it for a lot of genetically modified crops because they have traits that we can utilize. So we take that trait, just that gene, and we insert it into, in this case, corn, and that gene gets expressed in that organism, and as a result, it carries a benefit, maybe a pesticide, so resistance against insects, right? So, maybe a resistance against drought or wet conditions. So let's brainstorm a list of ways plants can be genetically altered to increase the production of food. So I kind of said like we can increase yield, right? Resistance resistance to drought, wet, we'll just say wet conditions, pesticides/insecticides, weed resistance. I think that's pesticides, actually. Yeah, weed resistance. So those are just a few of the ways to increase production of food. But now we gotta also look at the risks and benefits of it, okay? Not just with crops, but just overall in general, because we can do this with like salmon. You know, there's genetically modified salmon, so they're bigger. So, you know, when we harvest them for meat, you know, they're bigger cuts. We do this with chickens. We do this with peaches. Here, let me go back here. This was a natural peach, 4000 BC. It's pretty small, okay? But this is the artificial peach 2014. It's completely different. We've done this with so many different species of crops. So, benefits. We can increase production. We can increase like nutrition, increase size. Those are a few big ones. But the risk, what are the risks of genetically modified organisms? Well, it's not natural, and it's actually relatively new. It's new. We don't know really the risks. I don't know if you know this, but in Europe, I'm pretty sure that genetically modified foods or fruits and vegetables are banned, or they have to be labeled. I'm not exactly sure on that, but I know that they have restrictions or regulations on it, where in the US, you know, the produce that you see in the grocery aisles, they don't have to be labeled. They don't have to say that this crop is genetically modified. And I know that there was legislation in the past, and I think it got obviously shut down. But yeah, we don't really know the risks of genetic engineering. Now, if we're talking about like salmon, well, geez, if some salmon should escape the fish farm and they were genetically modified to be bigger and badder and stronger and whatever, and all of a sudden they start mating with natural salmon populations, well, then you might see some differences. You know, you might see those traits being passed on, and now we're changing what salmon were like in nature. Okay. Now, DNA technology, this genetic engineering, genetically modifying DNA, it does have a lot of applications. The first one's DNA identification. Your DNA is very unique to you. We have a national DNA database that helps us solve crimes. You know, you've seen on the crime shows, they find some DNA, they find some blood, they run it through a national data bank to see if they get a hit, you know. We use DNA databases in the scientific community, from the NCBI with BLAST. We can compare genomes from one species to another. Okay, so we have like a big DNA database. But my question to you is, be very careful with this. Is it an invasion of privacy? Because your DNA identifies you. So if you have your DNA out there for the world to examine or see, you know, it might be used incorrectly. And I'm kind of focusing more on insurance. You know, so if your DNA is in a database and it gets, you know, bought out by an insurance company, well, now that insurance has that DNA information on you, and they can say, oh, hey, you have a tendency to, you know, this disease runs in your family. Oh, you want insurance from us? Okay, well, we're going to jack the rates because there's a high chance that you'll develop this disease later on. So that's my big concern right there, is your DNA being used against you. Nothing against finding out your ancestry, you know, figuring out your origins, but that's my biggest concern, I would say. Okay, so when we study the genome is all the genetic material inside of an organism. As we just mentioned on the previous slides, there's a lot of ethical and legal, as well as some social issues when you alter DNA. Cloning, you know, Dolly the sheep in a previous chapter. You know, is it right to clone animals? Dolly, because she was cloned, she had adult DNA. She developed a lot of health problems earlier in her life than if she was not cloned. We use cloning for insulin in humans to make insulin for folks that have diabetes. And it comes from, I want to say another organism, but you know what, because it's going on YouTube, I don't feel confident in saying what organism. Beef cattle, you know, genetically modified beef, bigger, so that you can get more meat, more bang for your buck. And then I'm going to show you, I posted some links for Lancelot Encore, cloning your pet dog. Okay, so make sure you watch those links because they do bring up some good ethical questions that you should think about, especially the human cloning, because as of today, to my knowledge, humans have not been cloned. But then I just saw on YouTube a documentary about a human clone, the first human clone, and I'm like, I don't know if that's true or not, so just be aware of that. Now your questions, there's two, but I split up question 2, so there's 3 on the Google document, or the assignment on Google Classroom. So what is changed by genetic engineering? That should be pretty easy. And then I split, what are some risks associated with using genetic engineering in food crops? You know, for taking bacteria DNA and putting it into the food crops, you know, does that get incorporated into us eventually? I don't know. We don't know really the risk. I guess I'm answering that question. And then the benefits with food crops, which are a lot of different benefits for that.